Good morning, everybody. Yesterday I preached a message as pertaining to metaphors and sin. Whenever we think of sin, we describe sin most of the time along the lines of a metaphor. For instance, bearing a weight, or what we normally have in our culture is sin is a debt or a transgression. Now, when we think of a debt and a transgression, most of the time we find transgression defined within the parameters of a monetary system, where we think that whatever was owed was not paid. In other words, we would have a law. That law would then describe good works or equitable deeds. We then have to do those equitable deeds, and should we not do it, then we will be lacking in paying or giving good works. Now, because sin has been described along the lines of debt, and the framework of understanding of sin is described by the metaphor debt, we overreach or overbear or overstretch the metaphor, and we come to conclusions that is not mentioned in that metaphor. So what we do is we would think, and we would take it even further and say, well, if you cannot pay your debt, what would then take place? And we would take the whole monetary system and the laws of the land, and we will describe the forgiveness of sins and what need to take place as pertaining to sin within the complete system that there is in our culture and our time. We also need to realize that metaphors and the meanings of metaphors has changed over time, and that is very, very important. Now, let me give you a good example of a metaphor that can be overstretched or over explained or leaned too heavily upon. And that is the example of Jesus saying, look at the birds of the air. They don't sow or reap or gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Now, all that Jesus was trying to say through that metaphor, the plain language was, listen, you cannot provide for yourself by your own ability. Now, we can take it further. We can then say, and this is the overstretching, so we can say, well, if we look at the birds, we find that the birds really work very hard to go and collect what God has given them. And what is then said is typically the opposite of what Jesus Christ was saying, because we are taking the metaphor too far. We are taking the broader context of the metaphor or the life of the bird, and we want to interpret everything that God said and what God is saying in the light of that, which is wrong. Now, that is what's happening in our definition of sin as well. If we look at sin, what is sin? Sin is very simple. Sin is when you take a responsibility upon yourself that is not for you to bear. To have simple language, or what Plato would say, pure communication, is to simply say that sin would be to try and produce eternal life by yourself without relying upon God. That is what sin would be. The consequences of that sin would then simply be that your life will fall apart. Now, when we even use the words fall apart, it's also an idiom. We cannot, a metaphor, talking about something that is physical that falls apart. It's very difficult to have what we call straight talk or pure communication. It simply would mean that you would find that you cannot, by your own ability, produce that which God has brought upon your life, and it can result in things like stress, or what we would call, and again, we're using now a metaphor of a tree, the fruit of the flesh, or the effects of mortal man trying to produce immortality, which is hatred and bitterness and so forth, which I cannot get into in this small daily devotional. So what I want to say to you is this. The forgiveness of sin, the best way we can look at it is along the lines of the original metaphor that was used, which was the bearing of a weight. So when God forgives sin, it's very simple. He sees that you've taken the responsibility upon yourself to bear the weight of producing happiness and joy and peace and eventually eternal life. And he says that kills you. It puts you at a place where your life is being destroyed. And that he says, well, I'll take that burden upon me. I'll bear that burden. And the way when he was bearing that burden was he simply took the burden of conquering death upon himself, and he conquered death. And he offers his victory to you, saying that I'm victorious over sin and death, and I bear that for you. So now my power of resurrection can start to work within you. You can be a new creation, and he sets you free from what oppresses you. That is what forgiveness of sin would be like, defined along the lines of the original metaphor of bearing a weight. We think of the scapegoat, where he would bear the sins of Israel into the desert and so carry away their burden, the burden that was upon them, the responsibility that was upon them, that which rested upon them to be a successful nation and so forth. It is taken away by God. The way God takes away the burden of the disobedience of Adam is by simply saying, I'll take it upon my shoulders to bring your life, and I'll enter into the mess that your life is in. Now, I end off by saying this. Whenever you feel you're carrying a burden, know that that is not what God has designed you to do. He's not designed you to carry a heavy burden. And even forgiveness of sins would be explained along the lines of carry one another's burdens. That would mean make life easier for one another. Now, the way we carry one another's burdens is we would remove from one another that which the other must do in order to produce basically righteousness by his own works. And we can go into a whole lot on what that would mean. But I want to just encourage you on this Monday morning with the following, and that is that whenever you feel you carry a burden, know that that is wrong. It's not supposed to be like that. And whenever you feel that, you can go to God, because he's going to lift it for you. He's going to, when you really talk to him and communicate with him about it, you're going to find out that he is telling you that he is taking it away. And he will, in your communication with him, show you how he's carrying it. So, thank you that I could serve you with this simple good news today. If you feel to do so, go to my latest message that I've preached. I think I've entitled it Metaphors and Sin, or Sin and Metaphors, on YouTube. Go and look at it. It will truly impact you in a very great way. God bless.